The following is a Hoop Ball presentation.
Welcome to another edition of the Hoop Ball Sacramento Kings podcast. I'm your host, Christian Villere. You can find me on Twitter at MyBuddyChris. For all of Hoop Ball Sacramento Kings coverage on Twitter, it's at Hoop Ball Kings. And for all of your NBA news, NBA fantasy news, and Sacramento Kings coverage period, it's hoop-ball.com, the new and improved hoop-ball.com. There is now a team-specific page for the Sacramento Kings. Go there to get all of these podcasts, as well as all of the great work from our Sacramento Kings beat bloggers. You can find this show on Stitcher, YouTube, iTunes, and Google Play, as well as the Hoop Ball Radio app, which you can download for free in the iTunes Store or Google Play. The Fantasy Draft Guide is now out on hoopball.com. Make sure to go pick that up. If you're playing fantasy basketball, it is a must. Comes along with the Brewski 150. On the show today, we have Sacramento Kings beat blogger for Hoop Ball, Mr. John Schifferle. We spent a good deal of time on De'Aaron Fox. What do we see from him in year two? What do we think is the best utilization of his skills? And ultimately, what will go down this season as they figure out the best way to utilize those skills? And then we got into another yay or nay question. Will Harry Giles be better than Skal Labissiere? All that and more on this episode of the Hoop Ball Sacramento Kings podcast. Welcome in the always effervescent and up for Sacramento Kings talk. Sacramento Kings beat blogger for Hoop Ball, Mr. John Schifferle. How are you, sir?
Not too bad, I guess. Effervescent.
That's the way I would label you, at least with under 25 days until the first preseason game for the Sacramento Kings. October 1st, I looked at who it is, but I already forgot. 7 o'clock, they're playing somewhere. It's against the Utah Jazz or one of the other 29 teams in the NBA. In the meantime, what do we do getting ready for the regular season, preseason, training camp, all that good stuff? We break down the players on this Sacramento Kings team. And one player who we've analyzed a good deal, but haven't gone truly in-depth, I don't think, on in at least a while, and maybe not since we started this podcast, is the one, the only De'Aaron Fox. He was the subject of the Game Theory podcast. How do you pronounce that guy's last name, John? Sam who?
I want to say it's Vicini.
Vicini,
and,
Sam Vicini, yeah.
Yeah.
They went knee-deep on the Suns prospects and the Kings prospects. They spent a good deal of time on De'Aaron Fox, and their big takeaway from De'Aaron Fox was they're not sure how he's going to do in his second season. Are you doing okay over there, John? It sounds like things are breaking.
Yes, sorry.
Fantastic. They're not sure what he's going to end up being. They thought he had a solid rookie season. He was taking a little too much in the way of negative feedback for his rookie season, but they see him right now as a 50-50 in terms of what he's going to be end up doing in the league. They're not terribly sure. They don't see the massive upside that Sacramento Kings fandom does. Looking at his shooting splits, they made me a little concerned because I thought he had shown some growth from the early part of the season to the latter part of the season. Unfortunately, he has not. Where do you see this, John? How do you see it playing out with De'Aaron Fox as we move into season 2?
I feel like a lot of it's probably just about his size and how much he can sort of add to his frame without losing any of that speed. Just because they noted this, I think, but he's very fearless going to the basket. He's willing to run into people, but right now he's just bouncing off of them, and that's really the problem. He needs to go, and he needs to actually be able to finish through contact if he's going to be good the way he is. I probably believe in his shot more than most NBA fans would. I don't think he's going to be a great shooter, but I think he'll be good enough. I would just wonder about really how strong he can get and how big he can get, which I think I look at his frame and I see someone who can probably add quite a bit of weight without really losing a step. But I don't know. How do you feel about him actually growing, in a literal sense over the next couple of years?
I think it'll be an easy thing for him to do because it's been my experience that as you get older, it becomes easier to put on weight. However, the reason for that amongst the general population is a little bit different than the NBA population. He's going to be playing a lot. He's going to be eating a lot. He's going to be lifting a lot of weight. He's naturally going to get older, which is going to put weight on him regardless. I don't see it as being a big issue of him needing to put on weight. It's eventually going to come. He's going to be a little bit stronger this year, next year, moving forward. As long as he makes an effort to work on it, I don't see it being a big issue. The biggest issue is really the shot distribution. If he gets more looks at the rim and converts them at the same rate that he did in his first season, then we're good. As long as he eliminates the amazingly high amount of shots that he took between, 5 feet and below the 3-point line, it was a way too high amount of shots when we looked at it on Basketball Reference after a podcast. It was something like 38% of his shots. That's going to need to decrease dramatically. Increase the high percentage shots at the rim. Take more good looks behind the arc. Add all that together. It's going to make for a much more productive season from him. Yes, I do see the muted. Like, if you look strictly at his numbers and don't project at all, I think it becomes easy on a national level, or for people who aren't plugged into the Kings like you and I are every single game, to say, I'm not really sure what I see there. For them, it's more so you've got to prove to them what you have, because in this league, everybody's got potential. But for us, sitting here, this being our team, we'll look at the lay of the land, and of all the young players that we have, it's clear to us that he represents the one with the most likely chance to take a big leap in his second year, and just take a big leap, period, because you've got Willie going into his fourth year, Skal going into his third year, Buddy going into his third year, and then, of course, the rookies from last year along with De'Aaron. There's a little bit of a spread between all the young players that you have on the team, but even looking at it from my perspective, I still think that he represents the guy with the biggest chance for an upside or for a big jump in year two. Is that the way you see it?
I would say he's got easily the biggest shot at a jump in year two, other than, technically, really anything Harry Giles does is a pretty big jump, but I guess we're going to consider him year one, right?
I would say we're going to consider him year one because he has not made an NBA field goal yet.
Yeah, so he's going to have a huge jump if you consider it year two, but he's probably not in this conversation. So it's really between him, Frank Mason, who I think is supposed to be a backup, really, and I don't know that he has to get that much better to become a backup. Like, he has a lot of improvement to make to be like a real NBA player, but obviously if you're capping the ceiling there can only be so much improvement. Whereas Fox, I think, could take a huge leap just based on the expectation and kind of what he looked like in that one summer league game, as small of a sample as that is, and as much as you need to be careful with making assumptions off summer league games. He looked interesting, so I think it's interesting there. But the two things that really stand out to me for why he might be a little underrated from people who watch more nationally versus Kings fans is, one, I saw him with a much different shot when he was taking like off the dribble jumpers and step backs where he had to shoot quickly and just kind of shoot with what seemed like more of his natural motion, rather than when he was catching and shooting it or had time and it sort of became more of like a mechanical motion. I feel like if you look back, the two games that really are the easiest to find this would be both of his games. He had two really big games against the Spurs in the second half of the season. I think both of those are good examples of him taking some quick jumpers from behind the three-point line that seemed much smoother than when he normally shoots. So that really stands out to me, and it's not something he showed a lot. So if he can kind of get more toward that type of shot, I think he has a much better chance to be an effective three-point shooter. But the second thing that I noticed is there were times where you can really tell he's an extremely good ball handler. And I feel like the reason he settled for mid-range jumpers so often is he kind of got into space and he got enough room to pull up in the mid-range a lot last season, where I think he should have kept attacking and going to the rim, but he would have had to come up with something because there was someone in front of him. Like, he's going to have to try and use a crossover or do something like that. And it's just easier when you have that type of space to pull up and take the jump shot. But he kind of needs to be a little bit more aggressive attacking the basket in those situations. It happened a lot when he was coming off screens. And if he can really use his ability to handle the ball in situations like that, I think he could take a huge leap. But he didn't really do that last season. We'll see what he was able to learn this offseason and if he's able to actually, make those transitions. But that's really what a lot of it is about to me as well.
And it also, I think you touched on it a little bit, is scheme. Who is on the floor with him? What are they running? Does he have open lanes to get to the basket and make that transition in terms of what his shot distribution looks like? If he's out there time and time again with guys who are going to clog the lane and make it much, much harder on him to either get to the basket or break down the defense and distribute to open three-point shooters, then we're all going to end up frustrated. And I think bad things are going to happen for all involved. Players will be all right, but I think there might be changes for the people leading the team in various areas. Of course, that always seems to be on the table for the Sacramento Kings because the losing doesn't ever seem to end. That could turn around. They could recognize that they want a different scheme. For whatever reason, I feel like Jaeger's going to put his foot in the sand and realize that he does like Zach Randolph. He's going to have to manage that relationship with Zach Randolph, but Zach Randolph seeing the floor, clogging the lane, and preventing him from being able to win. Like, he's got to be staring at the numbers, and I hate to veer this into another discussion about Zach Randolph, but he's got to be looking at the numbers and seeing what we see. If he does that, and he actually sticks to his plan to increase the pace, give De'Aaron Fox more freedom, open up the offense a little bit, surround him with shooters, he's got just as good a chance of anybody to make a leap, show his valuable assets and his valuable skills in leading a team, passing, developing the full complement of his game, because we definitely didn't see that last year. There was a little bit of him being deferential to the other players on the team. And when he's sharing the floor with George Hill, you can definitely see him being deferential. And when both of those players were on the floor and being deferential, that didn't do the Kings much of any good because those were pretty much their two best players.
Yeah.
Well, but this gets me to a thing that they touched on in that Game 3 podcast. He looked really good in some spurts as the second ball handler on the floor. Do you see that as something that he should be slotted into, or something that the Kings should try to get him more minutes in the role of the second guy on the floor, second ball handler?
I like him in the sense that, or I like him operating in that way in the sense that I think he's better suited to look for offense for himself right now. And really, I see his upside coming as a scorer and as more of a secondary distributor, kind of like Victor Oladipo is in Indiana, or the way that Donovan Mitchell is in Utah. I don't know that I see him really, or if you want to compare him to someone who's less of a star, like an Eric Bledsoe when he was with Phoenix. I I don't know that I see him necessarily being this guy that's going to get you like 7, 8 assists a game. And I see him as a player that's maybe even going to be more in that 4 to 5 assists per game range at some point when he really takes over as a scorer. When you're put in the place of being a point guard like he was last season, that's going to inflate your numbers a little bit just because, how often he's trying to be the primary facilitator. And I do think he's got some talent there, but I think he has more talent as a player that's trying to get himself points. And that's where I think he's a good fit with a player like Bogdan Bogdanovic, and even a good fit with the player that they thought Justin Jackson would be. I don't know that they need a point guard next to him, but I do think they need players on the perimeter that are going to create offense around him. At the same time, I don't think that it's a great fit with Jaeger's scheme where he kind of wants to run offense out of the high post with players like Willie Cauley-Stein right now. I assume Harry Giles will take over that role quite a bit next season. I don't know that I like De'Aaron playing off the ball in that sense. Unless he gets much better as a catch-and-shoot player, I just don't know that he really provides that much value. Like, he can still cut well, and he can still be a good offensive player in that sense, but I don't know that he makes a lot of sense in that high post offense. So I do think they need to change the scheme a little bit, but I think my first option is to have more perimeter players that can sort of help out in terms of distribution, but I don't know that I actually want De'Aaron playing off the ball in that high post system that much.
I don't look, I don't want to spend 25% of the game watching horn sets. I'm not sure I can take it. Maybe every once in a while, but it's too much.
I think it works with the right team. I mean, I don't have any problem with teams trying to play that offense. Like, obviously Memphis did it really well 5 years back or whatever it was when they were really at their peak with Dave Joerger, and they had a player like Marc Gasol who really fit that mold, and they had a player in Mike Conley who could operate well off the ball and play great defense and sort of fill every part of that role that you'd want from a point guard in that offense. And I think it also hit a lot of Mike Conley's weaknesses, where I don't know that he's a great playmaker either. But the fact is, he started shooting 40% from three in his second season. So he pretty instantly fit that offense. As much as people talk about how much his shot has improved over the years, it kind of improved really quickly for him and has gotten better slowly since that. But that's where I think that team fit more. And then you had a guy in Zach Randolph that obviously played really well in the low post, and having Marc Gasol run offense out of the high post kind of allowed Zach Randolph to have space to operate. It was just, I mean, it all over just made a lot of sense for that team. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Nuggets to do it as well, just because of how good of a playmaker Nikola Jokic is. But you do need kind of a specific roster where they have that same issue, where Jamal Murray doesn't really create as well for others as he does for himself and moves really well off the ball. So I think that works well. Gary Harris is kind of another player that fits in really well with Jokic, with, a lot of handoff plays and then really just running off the ball and operating as primarily as a catch and shoot player. I think it works really well for them as well. I just don't know that it fits the team that the Kings have. And I don't even know if you take some of these players and you really talk about their upside. Harry Giles seems like he could have that type of upside. Willie Cauley-Stein seems like he could do it a tiny bit, maybe as like a backup for Harry Giles, but I just don't know that it fits a ton of the players on this roster outside of those two. And maybe Buddy Hield.
I think it works well when you've got guys who know how to operate out of the high post. I think it worked well for the Kings with Malone when you've got DeMarcus Cousins and Rudy Gay as your guys at the elbow. The more you get away from guys who don't know or don't feel comfortable working in the high post, it cuts off so much of a potential of the outcomes that you could have out of that set. It mainly becomes a perimeter outcome from there out, because you either, if you're going to do something inside, then you've got to enter it into the post because no one knows how to operate out of the high post or feel comfortable. I want to push back a little bit on what you said about De'Aaron Fox and him being a more. What did you like? You feel like it's more beneficial, a higher priority. He's gonna fit better, being more so off ball like Victor Oladipo as opposed to being the number one primary driver of the offense. Is that's what you said, right?
I don't mean off the ball. I guess that's why I don't like him in the high post. But I just think with De'Aaron Fox, I see him as more of a player like Oladipo and more of a player like Donovan Mitchell, where both of them were absolutely the primary option offensively. They had the ball most of the time, but they also have players around them that can help as facilitators. Like Utah obviously has Joe Ingles that can run the pick and roll quite a bit. And they also had Ricky Rubio who can obviously facilitate pretty well. Outside of that, Royce O'Neal had a little bit of facilitating. I don't know. He didn't really facilitate as much as make good passes, but they had players that were around Donovan Mitchell that can help as just pure passers. And really, you look at Indiana, they had that same player in Darren Collison who could help a lot as a facilitator and as a point guard. And then you had players like Domantas Sabonis who just know how to make the extra pass well. Like, they fit really well on teams that know how to move the ball and even oftentimes have good facilitators next to the players that they are featuring, which would be Oladipo and Mitchell. But I think that might be more Fox's role, where he's the primary option, but it's best to have him around players that know how to pass at a high level. And it's best to not expect him to really be a guy that's going to go out and get you like 7 or 8 assists a game. I think he could develop into that player, but we saw last season that he's just not necessarily the most creative passer. And I would probably put Bogdan Bogdanovic over him. I mean, he did average still like 8 assists per 100 possessions or something like that, but I don't know that at this point that's really his role. We also see young point guards develop a lot in terms of, how they're able to see the floor. So we could see quite a bit of development here in the future, but we'll see. I think maybe that's his role going forward.
Well, I think the number one way this all gets decided is the Kings go with what is most comfortable for De'Aaron Fox. I think it's pretty obvious they've hitched their wagon to his development by passing on Luka Doncic. Does he want to be a James Harden type where he is the stir that straws the drink? Did I get the straw that stirs the drink? I think I said that right. Or the model that you mentioned, the Victor Oladipo model, where you're out there with another capable ball handler and you are the guy that's getting the ball at the end of the game, but there's somebody out there to alleviate some of the creation and ball handling duties. Now, if De'Aaron wants to be the guy to handle the majority of it, they're going to go with that route or the route that I talked about. It's not going to be decided by us. I think it's going to be decided by Jaeger. It's really going to be decided by what De'Aaron feels most comfortable with, what he wants to do, and how does what he wants to do fit with the scheme that they end up rolling out with this season. They've clearly got the personnel to space the floor, give him bigger lanes to drive. Will they do that? It's staring them directly in the face. Or will they go back to the rudimentary, the horn sets, the heavy post entry offense? That becomes the conundrum from there, because I don't think they're going to the decision of what this offense ends up being for De'Aaron Fox is outside of their control.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say that he needs to be put in positions where he's comfortable, but I think we saw last season that he was comfortable when he was asked to score and find offense for himself, and I think he was less comfortable when he was giving the ball up in the high post and trying to move off the ball and space the floor, because that just wasn't the player that he was. And
and how many elite lead guards can you say that is their game, that is their primary purpose on offense, or that they do that at an elite level? There aren't many. Not many people. I'm guessing, because I didn't see a lot of him, and I didn't pay as good attention to the coverage of him because there wasn't as much of it back in the day when I was younger. But I'm guessing they weren't saying that about Jordan either. Oh man, you know what? Real elite offensive, elite off-ball guard. They weren't saying that.
It's not necessarily about him being elite to me as much as, and honestly, that's kind of what I'm comparing him to, where I'd rather have him be closer to a scoring guard than a point guard. And you can even extend that to some point guards in the league today, which, like Kemba Walker, I think is a little bit more of a scoring guard than a point guard.
But I hate go ahead. I so disagree. I hate this. This goes back into the categorizing players. Like, he's a really good player and he's going to create a lot more offense for himself than maybe the normal, what we think of pass first point guard should. Does that necessarily mean that we shouldn't allow him to be the point guard, or shouldn't call him a point guard?
Well, it's not about that. We can call him the point guard. It's just about who you want to surround him with. Like, you can see Charlotte went and tried to surround Kemba Walker with playmakers like Nick Batum. And Nick Batum is not at all a scorer, but he does know how to create for others. He does know how to run the pick and roll. I just think that's where you're going to want to see De'Aaron Fox out there with a player like Bogdan Bogdanovic. And I think the natural assumption when Fox came into the league was that Buddy Hield and Fox were going to be a great pair together, because Hield knew how to operate off the ball and knew how to catch and shoot and really space the floor well for him. I would argue that Bogdan Bogdanovic is a better fit because he's a player that can take over as someone who can run the pick and roll every so often and run the offense for you, where Buddy Hield isn't really that player. And I think it also helps Bogdanovic that he's a very good shooter as well and operates off the ball as well. But I think having that player that can run the offense a little bit for you really does help De'Aaron thrive.
Oh, sure. And we've seen that in the playoffs, where one guy can't run the entire offense all season long and then be expected to continue doing that in the playoffs. It's humanly impossible.
Yeah, and I would compare it to, like, if you have, let's say, Ricky Rubio. The difference is when Ricky Rubio has the ball, he's going to need to create plays for others. Well, you're going to need to get someone else to help him, just like any other offensive player in the league. He's going to need to have a number two option. And that number two is probably going to need to be a player that can create offense for himself, because you want to have a little variety to what you run out there. So I think De'Aaron, for every possession you give him, the way you're making him the best he can be is you're asking him to focus more on getting himself looks than you are asking him to focus on getting other players looks. And so his number two option ideally is someone who can get other people looks more often. Whereas I think the number two option for a player like Lonzo Ball or Ricky Rubio, or a more, an older player like a Jason Kidd or a Steve Nash, is more of a scorer.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think with De'Aaron Fox, it's more of a playmaker.
I get what you're saying. Makes sense. He's going to be looking to score, and because of that, you want a guy off ball who's more of a catch and shoot type of player, somebody who's got that capability in his game. And luckily, the Kings have a bunch of that in their backcourt. Is there anything else that you would like to say about De'Aaron Fox before we move on to subject 2?
I don't know that I sounded that down on him at any point during this, but
no, I don't think so.
If I did, I am still very excited about him. I think he could be very, very one of the best Kings we've seen in a long time.
Yeah, that you could
I'm
say
not
that.
Say like, yeah, well,
I mean, you could say that about, about everybody. We're gonna finish. We're gonna keep jinxing each other until we move on to topic 2.
I won't say it about Costa, but
Getting back to yay or nay, we started this a little bit last week. We've got a bunch of topics here. We're going to debate them, figure out what the answer is. This next one we're going to go with, and we're going to be going through these probably until the start of training camp or the preseason, until we have more stuff to talk about, or the season just gives us more stuff to talk about. Yay or nay, Harry Giles has a better year than Skal Labissiere. John Schifferle.
Harry Giles having a better season than Skal?
That's correct.
Oh, I don't see any way that Skal has a better season than Giles.
Okay, because I feel the opposite.
Really?
I feel like...
so what's your reason?
I feel the opposite because Skal's been in the league already 2 years, got a huge jump on Giles.
Okay.
He's really good defensively. We've seen some of Harry. Harry's got some defensive skill to him as well. Skal knows this is a make or break year for him. Harry, while he's chomping at the bit to get back on the floor, it's nowhere near make or break for him. He's still going to get another chance after this season. This could very well lead to Skal getting another deal off of this season, or it could mean he's playing for the tender offer, whatever that is, and gets injured and is out of the league because he's had so many injuries already. Not a super long injury history, but enough of an injury history where it is concerning. He doesn't have the innate basketball skill, but the one thing he does have is the innate drive to get better and better. We've seen glimpses of that. If we see more glimpses of it early on, I don't think he lets go of the rope. I think he grabs it, pulls it around his hands a little bit, and yanks that thing towards him and grabs the brass ring, doesn't let go of it, and becomes right behind De'Aaron Fox, another guy who takes a mini leap. I'm not going to go with the full leap. We're going to be cautiously optimistic. He's very easily a player that can spot up. He's shown that skill. He can be a player that the Kings roll out there and stretch lineups. They can score. They can fit the bill as far as stretching the defense on the offensive side of the ball and providing the shot blocking on the defensive side of the ball. Couple all that together with him really badly wanting this. We can all see that. Everybody loves Skal. He's clearly put in the work this offseason. He's a little bit bigger. He's going to have that strength. He's not going to get pushed off his spot. He's going to realize that in order to prevent being pushed off your spot, it's going to take the mental fortitude of saying, F this guy. I'm not letting him take my spot. I'm going to take this spot. I don't care who's the stronger guy. I'm going to earn this piece of territory on the court. He's going to develop that mindset. Couple that together with it being a contract year for him and him having the prior NBA experience, along with the versatility on the offensive and defensive sides of the floor. I think that ends up being the reasons why he is having a better year for the 2018-2019 Sacramento Kings. I rest my case.
So I'll say this. It's very rare to see a player selected top 2 in the draft play less than 25 minutes a game. So I think we can pencil in Bagley for around that much. Also, people were hard on him for Summer League, but we didn't see him rebound all that well. And that was easily the best thing he did in college, maybe actually outside of finishing. But, we didn't see him rebound and finish around the basket. I think you'll see that a lot more in NBA games. And
you're talking about Bagley.
Yeah, I just think he's going to be productive his first year. So it's just not going to be shocking at all to see him play 28 minutes a game. I think I'd be surprised if he plays less than 23. I would expect at least about 23, probably about 25. So he's penciled in for some big man minutes. Giles, we talked about this before the pod. He's clearly just going to be a player that Dave Yeager likes. And, seems to play the game the right way, seems to play hard all the time, doesn't make a ton of mistakes. I just don't see a way that he isn't also penciled in for a good 25 minutes a game, with the caveat that I don't think he plays a ton of back-to-backs. I think if there's any minor ankle tweak, sore foot, whatever, anything like that, he's sitting out, So I think there's some minutes to be had there. He's probably missing a good 20 games, I'd assume, just out of caution alone, without any injuries. And I think that's the right move, too. I don't see a reason to really push him in any way this season. I just don't know that there's a ton of minutes for Skal, and I think the team is decently happy with Cauley Stein. I think they think of it as, we need you to take that one last step before we commit to a contract, which that last step is, consistency defensively, probably. And I think they're going to give him every opportunity to show that. I just don't know that Skal gets much more than 5 minutes to 10 minutes a game to start the year, just because I think he gets squeezed out. So, to me, training camp, he probably gets a good opportunity to show that he's a much different player. And if there's one thing we know about him, he runs very hot and very cold. So maybe he's just incredible in preseason, and the Kings give him a good shot at a decent, rotation spot early in the year. But I could also see a scenario where he's just not on for those couple preseason games for whatever reason, and he just gets buried all season. So I don't see Harry Giles having many avenues to being buried, but I see Skal pretty easily getting buried on this roster just because of, his standing in the organization.
You kind of made my case for me there. Harry Giles spends 20 or so games not playing due to precautionary reasons with the knees. Marvin Bagley Jr. or Marvin Bagley III doesn't play as much because, in my estimation, Yeager's still going to have the quick hook with the young player. Also, it's a complete open question as to what Marvin Bagley brings to the forefront early on. Some people are high on him. Some people are unsure exactly what his fit's going to be. Does he translate to the NBA game? Maybe not does he translate to the NBA game, but how does he fit himself into the NBA game as a young player? How easily can he do that? Is that more of a struggle for him? Couple that together with Skal really wanting to do well, it being very obvious that the Kings play better with Skal on the court. And with Willie Cauley-Stein, I could very easily see them looking at Skal and Willie and thinking, all right, we can delay paying a guy an extra year and let Willie walk, save like $10 million, and then have a year later with Harry and Marvin Bagley being second-year players, along with Skal, all three of those guys being motivated. Skal now either with a slight extension, a nice team-friendly extension, or rolling the dice going into yet another contract year, providing the Kings with the backcourt or the frontcourt depth that they need, the frontcourt versatility. I think you could very easily make the case, which a case I just made, that he's the most versatile frontcourt player that the Kings have.
Yeah,
that, in my opinion, deserves getting a nice long look at the beginning of the year, especially when you've got nothing to play for at this point in time. They are the bottom of the Western Conference. They don't have a draft pick. It's all a matter of building your team, figuring out the guys you want to go with, giving the guys who have earned it, the guys who are showing the most promise, the most minutes. There's nothing that the Kings have to do other than that. Figure out the lottery tickets that they have right now are going to pan out. Which ones end up being the ones you want to keep? That's the only thing they have to do this season. But even when you give them one task, they manage to screw that up, unfortunately.
Well, I think they're going to want to get, Kosta Koufos and Zach Randolph some minutes. And you can argue in a worst case scenario, they're trying to get both, like 10 minutes a game at the very least. Maybe. I don't know.
Jaeger is very pointed with his players. He is very upfront with them, and they appreciate that. I could very easily see him going to them early in the year and saying, guys, you're not going to play. I see that being less so a possibility with Costa, but it could still end up being the case.
I mean, let's just say he says that to Randolph and Costa gets 5 to 10 minutes to start. I just don't see... I see Harry Giles being a player that he loves playing, so I see him at 25 a game at a minimum. Marvin Bagley, again, that 25 per game mark is just very rare for a second overall pick to go, lower than. So I see him at that mark. If you give, both of those 50 minutes, Willie Cauley-Stein, they want to see what they have. I see him playing at least as many as he did last year, so let's give him 25. You're not talking about a ton of minutes left there. So if you give Costa 5, we're already up to, what is that? 80 minutes in the front court.
Mm-hmm.
And, then we got to get Bielitsa a couple minutes at power forward at the very least. Like, where is Skal going to find these minutes if those players are getting as much as they're going to get? Now, I could see Skal having a big, preseason and then getting a couple looks early and then really finding his spot. And all of a sudden, Cauley-Stein is a little lower down and maybe they're looking to trade him because they're, excited about Skal again. But I really think he needs to have a good preseason. Otherwise, I think they're giving those minutes to Cauley-Stein. And I think when a player like Harry Giles is sitting out for a back-to-back potentially or for, again, a small ankle tweak or whatever it is, I think he turns to Randolph and Koufos and says, we're going to try and get you in 10 to 15 minutes, or 10 to 15 games this season, and you give them a little bit of run. So I don't really know where he really gets the minutes if he doesn't have a good opening to the preseason.
They're going to give everybody a fair chance. I think it's going to be a fair competition. I don't think Jaeger's going to come in and say, oh, this guy's going to play this much, this guy's going to play this much. It's all up in the air. They have complete carte blanche. There's no finagling for a better pick by tanking or playing this player more and this player less and resting the veterans. It is all about what is the best strategy to get wins and develop these players. I
agree.
That's it.
I think he could play himself out of the rotation in the preseason, I think. Because I already think you can tell the coaching staff isn't that excited about him. I mean, he wasn't getting a ton of minutes last season when they claimed they were transitioning to playing young players, and it was him and Willie Cauley-Stein and maybe a couple young forwards like Jakar Sampson and I guess Bruno Caboclo's in that, Nigel Hayes is in that. But I don't know how many minutes he really even got then. And then you have to throw in Marvin Bagley and Harry Giles and Nemanja Bjelica. Like, can he really expect more than 5 to 10 minutes a game? I would give him that for sure. I would say he makes a lot more sense than Cauley-Stein, but I don't really know why, based on what we've seen, we would think that the team actually likes him that much.
He played 60 games last year. He started 28. He averaged 20.7 minutes.
I mean, he did. He got heavy minutes in some games. I just think you can easily give those, if you just combine the Jakar Sampson, Nigel Hayes, Bruno Caboclo minutes into one player, and that's essentially Nemanja Bjelica. I don't see them playing him a whole lot less than that, to be honest. I think he's getting 15 to 20 minutes to start the season. You combine that into one player, and then you divvy up Skal's minutes to Harry Giles and Marvin Bagley, and that's only 10 per game for each of them. Like, I just don't know that he has that many minutes waiting for him if he doesn't really perform in the preseason.
I take back what I said earlier about the Kings winning. It's really a matter of developing the players. Is the team better in April than it was in October? Don't really give a crap what the wins are going to be, because I'm sure there's going to be half a dozen games, probably a dozen, maybe even more, where it's a coin flip and they lose because they're the young team and they just fudge it down the drain. I'm still looking at Skal's line. He shot 10% better from the free throw line on just about the same number of attempts per game, even though it was only 2. That's something. Then
Pauly Stein?
No. He improved 10% in his free throw percentage last year, but it was
he looked more comfortable.
But it was pretty much the same number of attempts, and that number of attempts was only 2. Is there anything else that we need to add on this topic before we sign on out of here?
No, I think that's all for me.
Yeah, I think so. Awesome. Well, that is another episode of the Hoopball Sacramento Kings podcast. You can find John on Twitter at John Schifferle. You can find me on Twitter at MyBuddyChris. For all of Hoopball's Sacramento Kings coverage on Twitter, it's at Hoopball Kings. For all of your NBA news, NBA fantasy news, and Sacramento Kings coverage, period, it's hoop-ball.com, the new and improved hoop-ball.com. There is now a team-specific page for the Sacramento Kings. Go there to get all of these podcasts, as well as all of the great work from our Sacramento Kings beat bloggers. The Hoopball Fantasy Draft Guide is up. Go pick up a copy of that. They've got a ton of nice goodies that go along with that when you buy it. I saw some tweets today that there's a bunch of extra stuff that you get. It looks like, don't hold me to it, but it looked like there's a bunch of extra stuff that you get when you pick up the guide. You could find this show, of course, on YouTube. You can find it on Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, and of course the Hoopball Radio app. For John Schifferle, I'm Christian Villere. See you next time.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.